Have you ever heard this claim? Christians, all you Christians, are absolutely anti-science. As a matter of fact, you're so anti-science that the history of Christianity has really repressed and limited what scientists could do. As a matter of fact, Christians have burned more scientists, I should say, at the stake and really have restricted the advancement of the sciences because they're so anti-science. I hear that claim all the time, that somehow we have limited the progress of science, that we have inhibited in some way the progress of science because we're so anti-science. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at the history of science on a timeline, you'll see that the history of science kind of charts along at pretty even pace, and then begins to take off in steady bumps until we have the scientific revolution, the explosion of science in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, or in that range. Well, if you look at that explosion of science and place Jesus on the timeline, where do you think Jesus is going to stand? He's going to end up standing right before the advances of the sciences. That could be a coincidence. Or it could be that Jesus and the worldview that he initiates is a catalyst for what we do in the natural sciences. And in fact, it is. More science has been done because of a Christian worldview that ignited a couple of things. Number one, we provided a structure and a worldview in which we believe that there's an orderly, singular God, not a disorderly bunch of gods who are they're not distinct from their creation. So what's the point in doing science if you can always attribute it to some crazy God who's not rational? That was the case in the Roman pantheon. A bunch of crazy gods that were not distinct from their creation. So if you thought, well, why are we having lightning today? I guess, Zeus is upset. Why would you even examine what lightning's about? But it turns out under a Christian worldview in which you have a single orderly God distinct from his creation changed the way we started to look at creation. And it was an igniter for the sciences. Another thing that was an igniter for the sciences is that we established the modern university. Those three universities, if you think about universities the way that you're thinking about them today, they are birthed in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. These are three Christian institutions. And from those three Christian institutions were birthed another 24 daughter universities. And from those daughter universities came all of the scientists who are basically involved in the scientific revolution. They were largely coming out of a Christian educational tradition. As a matter of fact, if you made a list of all of the scientists who are kind of like top of the, tip of the iceberg, top drawer scientists who actually were so important historically that they founded the scientific disciplines, they initiated the major scientific disciplines like the father of biology, the father of astronomy, the father of quantum mechanics. Go back and look at who they are. Look at their worldview. Here's what you're going to discover. The science fathers are dominantly Christ followers. Every other group combined, multiplied several times, will not reach the number of scientists who initiated scientific disciplines who were also Christ followers. We've dominated the science. We still continue to dominate it. More Christians have won the Nobel laureate in sciences than all the other groups combined. Well, why is that the case? Because we have a catalyst view that says, you know what, when we are actually doing science, we're not just doing science. We are looking at the evidence in the book of nature, worshiping God with our minds. We are discovering the nature of God as revealed in the natural realm. And we see this as a holy endeavor in which we get to know God better. You might be geeked out on the sciences and you'll do a great job, but if you're thinking you're actually learning about God, your creator, that's a whole nother level of intensity. And because we've held that level of intensity, and these scientists have written about Jesus in their personal journals. Some have even written books about Jesus. Certainly their letters to one another they write about. If all you had were the personal journals, books, and letters of the science fathers, you could actually reconstruct the entire story of Jesus at a level that's even higher than what you can reconstruct from the ancient church fathers. More can be known about Jesus from the personal writings of the science fathers than almost any other category. So you couldn't even destroy the person of Jesus by destroying the New Testament. You'd have to destroy the history of science. That's the impact we have had as Christians, that Christ has had as initiating a worldview that was a catalyst for the sciences.
Christians have this reputation for being anti-science. And I say I don't know why, but I actually kind of do know why, because even just as I'm talking about apologetic natured stuff, and even just on Sunday, I was talking about questions of Genesis 1, and people were like, well, the scientists believe this, or the scientists believe that, and they would go in as if like they were completely against, it was like Christianity or science, but you're saying science led you into belief in God, which led you to Christianity. Can you touch on that a little bit in your journey?
Yeah, so what happens is in any scene, any crime scene, you pick up pieces of evidence. So let's say, for example, on a crime scene, I discover, a pair of glasses, and then I discover a cup, and then from these things, I make an inference. In other words, I look at those facts that I've gathered, and then I start to try to figure out, well, how can I explain those facts? And then I arrive at the most reasonable explanation for those facts. That's called an inference. It's an inference from evidence. So there's a difference between facts and inferences. Now, science is good because it allows us to gather all kinds of data, facts. But that doesn't mean that the conclusion's a fact. So you might say, well, okay, I've gathered this evidence in science, and from this I infer that evolution is true. Okay, fine. That's an inference. This doesn't make evolution a fact. The facts are over here. These are the pieces of evidence. Those are the facts. The conclusion, evolution, that's an inference from the facts. Now, it turns out, as Christians, we can use the exact same data that science provides us, the facts at the crime scene, but we may actually come to an entirely different conclusion based on the same facts. And by the way, this happens in every criminal trial I do. I'll bring up 10 pieces of evidence. Well, the defense attorney does not step up when it's his turn and bring up 10 new pieces of evidence. He doesn't. He just points to the same 10 pieces of evidence I've already entered, brings up a new expert to give a different inference from those same 10 pieces of evidence. So it turns out that I think that intelligent design, the idea that God is the author of what's in DNA, is a much better inference from the same scientific facts that the evolutionists try to use to get their inference. So don't be afraid of the science. The science just gives us the facts. We're still free to draw the most appropriate inference from the facts. How did I get the facts? I use science to get the facts.
Now,
How did I get the inference? I use my logical reasoning process to get the inference.
would you say that's the work of the philosopher and the theologian, or can the scientist do the inference as well? Like how does that relationship work out?
Now, I will tell you, this is where I think the rub kind of comes in. Because I think that the process of gathering the facts is a scientific process, and most scientists are very good at that. But the act of reasoning to an inference involves some philosophy, some understanding of the rules of evidence, that the rules, in other words, it's not about the science that got me the facts. It's about how do I reason philosophically about the facts afterwards. And I think they've got a lot of really good scientists who are good at getting us the facts, but that's where their job really ends. Now philosophers pick up and thinkers pick up and try to argue for why you should conclude certain inferences from the facts. And sadly, a lot of scientists are not great philosophers.
Right.
So it turns out that the philosopher can access the same data the scientist gives us. The scientist's work is done. And then he might be in a better position, or she might be in a better position to reason toward an inference because they understand philosophically the nature of reasoning, which probably sometimes is a little bit better than the scientist who's really over here in the data collection. Right. So, for example, I have CSI officers who come to my crime scene and they collect the evidence, but they don't work the case.
Right.
They don't put the case together and puzzle it. Detectives do that. We have to reason, what does that data mean? What's the best explanation for that data? The CSI officer is responsible for one thing. Sometimes they are scientists who actually investigate the facts, the data, but then they're done. They don't get involved in putting the hooks on a suspect. Right. We do that because we have to reason through that process. Well, all of you who are watching or listening to us, you have the ability to reason given the data. Once the scientist gives us the data, you can step aside from that now and draw your own conclusions.
Yeah.